Jean Marie, is this an hour or 2 hours?
What?
Is this meeting 1 or 2 hours?
Happened in my meeting.
The shorter, the better.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, it was a long day yesterday. An hour or 2 hours?
Well, I'm one of those high D personalities, you know, it's like, let's get to the bottom line. Let's go.
All right, Jean Marie, we're live on YouTube, so whenever you want to get going.
All right. Welcome to the Ordinance Committee meeting of August 20th, 2020. I will take roll call. I know Liam Gallagher is here, Assistant Town Manager, Jay Chase, the planner, Chris St. Pierre, who's a special guest. He's been an intern for us in Scarborough this summer. I appreciate that. Tracy Cole as admin, and then the official attendance, Counselor Hamill.
Here.
Counselor Johnson.
Here.
And then myself, Counselor Katerina. If we could just look very quickly at, Jean Marie needs to look at it, in other words. Oh, we have minutes from July 9th, 2020. Any comments or changes?
Nope.
My two fellow members, no. Okay, could I have a motion to approve?
So
So
moved.
moved.
I second.
All in favor? Oh, we got to do the roll call. I always forget this on Zoom. Mr. Hamill,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Katerina is an aye. Do we have any members of the public who would like to speak? I set aside a maximum of 15 minutes at the beginning of the meeting. It's 3-minute limitation on comments. So raise your hand. I noticed Rocky, you're out there. And I don't know if there's anyone else. Liam, do you see anyone else?
Just the town managers in attendance, and I don't see any hands up.
Okay. Going once, going twice. Okay, that's it. We're going to move forward then. So let's get into a discussion of growth management. This is a follow-up. We had sent, I guess, how do I want to put it? Walking orders to the Long Range Planning Committee, asking them to take a look at this because technically under the charter, they're in charge of growth. And they had a couple of meetings over the summer and came up with some findings. And also, in addition to that, Mr. St. Pierre, who, Chris, do you mind just telling us who you are and what your job has been this summer? So
Sure.
The public will know.
Yes, I'm a student or a grad student at the Muskie School at USM, and it's my first semester. I'm taking a course on local government with Professor Carolyn Ball. She kind of set up my internship with Larissa. I started with her, and so I'm here to do a project for the town of Scarborough.
And the project was, or has been?
I was asked to look at a few different things, the growth management ordinance, a look at any kind of current building trends and data that affect growth management, and the town's beach season pass analysis, and also the parking analysis at the Scarborough Land Trust conservation sites.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So Chris did a paper that the members of this committee should have gotten an email this morning on that. Jay, would you talk to us just a little bit about, you got the email and how do we want to do the, I'm going to defer to Jay. I hope you guys don't mind. Do we want to do the long range planning piece first or Chris's piece first? It doesn't matter to me.
So I initially heard a question to me anyway, and then I'll defer as to how you wish to proceed. But so as it's already mentioned, Chris, Larissa, as she has the last couple summers, has done a really nice job of communicating with the Muskie School and finding some really good interns for the community. And when she's, as she typically does, she asks around to different departments about what type of projects are going on that we might use some help on. And that was around the time where we started this discussion around the growth management ordinance and starting to look at, well, what type of information might help to inform ongoing discussions. And I think you'll see as we talk about the sort of the 5 questions that were posed to the Long Range Planning Committee from the Ordinance Committee, there's sort of a number of analysis points, data sets that they think will help inform an ongoing discussion. They weren't really prepared to provide any strong recommendations on a couple of things because they felt like they needed more information. And that's where we sort of said, well, let's see what type of nice work we can get out of an intern to start to inform that discussion. And so maybe my thought might be to have Chris maybe present, again, right now he's got some draft findings. I think maybe just a little bit of refinement as we go forward, but some really good work. And I know the internship ends, I believe, August 30th. And one of the pieces to the internship was to ensure that there was a presentation of the materials to a body of the town. And this seemed like a really good opportunity to do that because this is what we're talking about. So maybe Chris could start with, providing his updates. Yeah, we saw Chris provide his draft to me yesterday afternoon. So I've had a chance to give it a cursory review, and I know Karen Martin has spent some time looking at it as well, and was glad we're able to get that out to you this morning. Sorry it was this morning, but again, I think the expectation is this is the start of the conversation. And if I'm off base, I'm sorry about that, but this is the start of the conversation. Chris will probably put some finishing touches on that report, which we'll provide to the committee in the next week or two once it's finalized, and you'll have that with more time to review, and we'll put that out as a more public document than the draft at this point. So
Okay. Does that make sense to you guys, Dawn and Ken, to start with Chris's presentation? Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So with no further ado, Chris, you
Thank
ready
you.
ready to roll?
I'm ready.
Okay.
So I'm just going to run through this and just kind of read off some of the findings that I came up with.
Can you hold on one second, Chris? I'm sorry. Liam, do you have a copy of that by any chance, that report that you can put up?
Liam, if you can't find it, maybe I'll find it.
I love technology when I can get it to work right.
I have it pulled up if you want me to share, Liam.
There it is. I see it. I see it. Do you guys see it? I've got split screen
Yes.
showing here. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Hopefully this will be helpful for you, Chris, to have it up also.
Sure, because I'm just going to kind of
Sure.
touch base and run through it, and we'll
Yep.
pick
Okay.
out some highlights. And
All right.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Chris.
Go ahead. The floor is yours.
no worries. So I was just, like I said, this is a preliminary finding so far. Introduction just has some statistics about the town of Scarborough and what's happened. It has numbers as of July 1st, 2019, and some housing numbers. I jumped to single family growth trends. I was looking at an article. It was in actually January of this year's Mortgage Daily News, in which the author charts the decline in the size of new single family homes
Mhm.
the last 20 years. So it's kind of been typical after an economic downturn. And it's actually in New England, it's the decline in number of 4-bedroom homes and the shift to smaller homes. So we're actually below the national average. We're actually contracting in size in New England. So one of the trends that developers have had to contend with is the shift in housing needs between baby boomers and millennials. So as baby boomers are starting to move into other type of housing, including smaller, like branches like my parents just did. I sold them a house in Scarborough, actually, in Layton Farms. And they're also moving towards, condos, multi-units, and assisted living and nursing homes. And to take the place of the seniors moving into other accommodations, you have millennials, older millennials are looking to actually take over the single family, suburban homes, and younger millennials are looking for more smaller accommodations in densely populated areas, walkable, multifamily homes. And as for multifamily growth trends, I looked at a report from the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard, and the author Hannah Hoyt discusses the obstacles in providing affordable multifamily housing, from labor and skilled craftspeople shortages to high land acquisition costs and building material cost increases, which all have contributed to the lack of affordable housing being built. Then I kind of touch on the senior citizens a little bit more. In 2019, there's an article in Maine Biz in which the author includes a statistic that the state of Maine leads the nation in the median age of 43.8 years old. And I found another statistic in which the Scarborough's median age in 2019 was 47.1 years of age. So this Scarborough exceeds the state median age. Maine is poised to lead the nation in the number of 65 or older residents as a percentage of the population, with estimates for 2020 to be 22%, as compared to New England's percentage of 18% and a national average of 17%. In 2040, the numbers jump pretty sharply, and 29% for the state of Maine, 23% for New England, and 20% nationally.
Hey, Chris, can I just stop for a second? Don, your hand up. Did you want to?
I had a question. I just wanted to ask if you want to take questions as you go, or should we hold them toward the end? Because, I wanted just to ask how you'd prefer to do that, Chris and Jean Marie.
I can do either.
I was going to say, Chris, if you don't mind taking them as we go.
Sure. We can.
I know some people that disrupts their flow and they don't like that, and others. I apologize, Dawn. I was trying to find where we were and didn't see.
No
your hand.
trouble.
Thank you, Liam,
No
for
trouble.
catching that.
So Chris, if you're okay, I did want to ask you one quick question there. You said the New England trends are more pronounced than the national trends on some of the early points you made. Do you have any idea for what is the explanation for that? Is it a demographic? Is it a housing mix issue, or is it not known?
It's a little bit of each. I mean, Maine has the oldest housing stock in the country, and just older demographics. So I mean, it's going to be a significant issue. It's already starting to be, but in the next 20 years, it's going to get increasingly more significant.
That's great. Thanks. I didn't know that. That's a new factoid for Maine. Oldest median age, oldest housing stock.
Yes.
Thanks.
I'm sitting in a house that's 100 and something years old, so there you go. And I'm getting old. I turned 65 yesterday, so there you go. All right,
I live in Portland. My house is 200 years old.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't know how, but it's still here. Survived the fire. So.
Thank you.
Yes, no problem. I'm happy to just jump in and ask any questions you need to ask. But as a secondary segment of the population that's been impacted by the high costs of housing it's kind of been identified as a missing middle. And it kind of has two connotations. It actually has to deal with not only it's the type of housing, like in between single family, in suburbs and, like a town center type. So it's kind of an infill housing of multi-units and clustered housing types. And it also has to refer to kind of like the missing middle class, which has been in decline in the last, 20, 30 years. for a variety of reasons. And I was looking at the National Multifamily Housing Council, who had a fact sheet and said that over 1/3 of American households pay more than 30% of their income on housing, and that was in 2017. And it's been getting worse in all over Maine and across the country. Portland's been very difficult. I know, in my neighborhood and where I live. Then I jump down to, there's a study by the National Association of Home Builders in 2019. And there's a webinar by Dan Paralek, who's of Opticos Design. During his webinar, he stated that 59% of millennials are looking for missing middle housing in the for sale and rental markets versus 39% who are looking for single family homes. So this is kind of an interesting statistic where you have, it may be a good way to focus on or a draw to attract millennials to work and live in town, and keeping some of this, the young professionals here and kind of avoid the brain drain, which has been going on in Maine for a number of years. And I jump down to the growth management ordinance review. I looked at several towns. There are several who do have a growth management ordinance. And so the ones I kind of looked at was Falmouth, Leamington, Elliott, Waterboro, Arundel. And interestingly enough, the town of Wyndham has just passed, as of the end of last month. It goes into effect next week. Their growth management ordinance, which is pretty similar to Scarborough's. So I think Scarborough's led the way in creating a comprehensive growth management ordinance, and other communities are now looking to kind of model theirs after Scarborough's. I kind of lay out the differences in what they do. They use for growth permits, each residential unit requires one growth permit. Whether it's a 2-family or a multifamily, they require one. And they don't use the fractionalized system that Scarborough does. I haven't found any towns or jurisdictions who actually have used a fractional based system for growth permits for multifamilies. Waterboro, it's the same thing. And also Falmouth, there's no reserve pool, which Scarborough has. Wyndham did include a reserve pool, I believe. Yes, they do. And they also require 10% of those permits to be set aside for affordable housing if the reserve pool is increased. Let's see. Next, I moved down to the Scarborough ordinance, and when you determined or came up with the fractionalized growth permit process and the information that they used in 2008 to look at and come up with those provisions was sewage load, number of occupants per unit, and average vehicle trips. And I include those, in the report. I have not seen any updates. I was trying to find, see if there's any updates, but I don't see any that I could come across in my research.
Chris, Don has a question.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks, Liam. Chris, I was going to ask you again, not to monopolize the airwaves, but I was kind of curious. In your study of looking at the other towns' GMOs, I was curious in particular. Did you notice there was any particular thing that they may have done suddenly to try to get control of their growth? For example, let's use moratoriums, for example. I understand Falmouth did one recently. Were you able to get any insights on that? I know in our discussions with the Long Range Planning Committee, most folks feel that's a pretty crude tool and one that's easy to put in place but hard to manage. Did you have any? I know that's a real specific question. Do you have any kind of insights on that? The use of a moratorium by other towns?
I have not come across a moratorium in any of these jurisdictions. I have
Okay.
researched articles.
Sorry. I can tell you, Dawn, and Jay, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the state has an overarching statute to do with growth management. And I do believe that moratoriums are, it's very specific use of them. And they're very limited by state statute. So yeah, you don't see that a lot. I mean, you got to have a damn good reason for doing it, I guess is where I'm going with that. In other words, you got a runaway train for some reason. And I think, and again, I'm digging deep here, and I wasn't on the council and I wasn't all that involved. I wasn't in real estate yet at the time, but part of Scarborough's development of this growth management, I think we did a moratorium briefly to put this in place. But that was then and this is now. So just that's what I know, the background of moratoriums for
Thank you.
Towns. Am I right, Jay, on the state statute?
Yep, and actually, we could talk a little bit more about that. I did put some of the state statute language in the memo that I provided. And so there's really sort of two stipulations. We can take a look at those, but when we get there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Ken, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, in your research of the other surrounding communities that you mentioned that have implemented a growth management ordinance, and along with Wyndham, which is new, what was the commonality in there on the intent? Was it number of homes? Did any of them segment the type of homes, or was there a desired number? What was the driving, for lack of a better term, control feature in those ordinances? Because that's typically why we have them. So what were you finding?
There was a set limit in each town. Yeah, so there's a, and I actually include, some of those numbers in the report. I can
Great.
discuss if you want, or I think there's 14 states who actually have passed the Growth Management Act, and a lot of them in New England. I don't think Massachusetts, they just use their zoning laws, as I understand it. But yeah, they each have a cap in these different towns, and it's included in their growth management.
Right. And just to follow up, did you happen to notice each that had the growth management ordinance also had a comprehensive plan?
I think that Jay might have to, I think that may be a requirement.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
So that's a requirement. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. Let's see. So I was trying to find the history and the background of, how Scarborough came up with it, and I couldn't quite get my hands on that. And so I wasn't quite sure of, who came up with the fractionalized, system for, growth permits. So that kind of eluded me in my research, but I did go on the website. I went through all the past meetings for the long range planning committee, and I was in attendance of the last the ordinance committee when we talked about some of these things. So I've been trying to dig deep and find what was available to me.
And if I might just, as Chris, as you're mentioning it, and for those who might be watching or watch this later, I think it's helpful to just sort of at least put it in context a little bit that the idea of the fractionalized units really was an outgrowth of our 2006 comprehensive plan, and a number of the goals and directives that were established in that comprehensive plan. And so that was really the genesis for the start of those type of discussions.
Okay.
Without getting into great detail at this point, but.
Thank you, Jay. Any assistance provided is appreciated.
We do have a question from one of our attendees.
Sure.
Bear with me here. Chris, why don't you continue on, and I'll pull them in.
Interrupt me when you're ready.
Yeah.
So next I moved on to the Scarborough Land Trust. So I was asked to actually do a parking analysis. So I went to all the the conservation sites. And I do have a map included at the end of the report. So it has the history and background of the land trust. Like I said, I did go out to all the properties, and there's kind of been, I talked to Rich Bard, who's the executive director, and kind of compared notes with him, and then confirmed. But there's been times, even during the COVID-19 last few months, where some of these sites were getting a little overcrowded and parking issues, because people are out enjoying, they're trying to social distance and enjoy the outdoors where it's safer to do that. So in talking to Rich, he said that the land trust is in preliminary discussions to add to its land trust portfolio, and also add parking spots, some of the locations. He's talking to the local landowners adjacent to some of the properties, and trying to determine where the need is the greatest for some parking improvements, and also some larger signs. And I think they have a plan for increased visibility and larger signs, and maybe some more signs, it's more visible. So I included a little chart. It has the year in which the land trust site was accessible to the public, and it has kind of the actual parking spots available, potential extra, like little overflow if possible, and then future need that was identified by Rich Bard. And then the next section is the Scarborough Beach Pass analysis. And I tried to dig back as far as I could. I only got from 2012 to 2019, and unfortunately 2018 and 2017 are missing, so I could not include those in my report. I think one of the things that you might want to look at is, if to increase revenue, is the senior beach pass policy. So 2019, if all the numbers are correct in the chart, there were chunks missing, so I try to do my best. Scarborough distributed 2,582 senior beach passes, and that number is steadily increased over the years. Unfortunately, 2016 was the prior year I could compare it to, so it pretty much doubled in a couple of years. And that's another issue with the aging population. And I actually did a chart which includes all of the fee schedules for Kennebunk, Kennebunkport, Biddeford, Wells, York, and Gunkwit. So that pretty much, you can take a look at that and just compare notes and see what other jurisdictions are doing.
Chris, we're the only one who doesn't charge, is what I think.
That's
I
correct.
saw.
Yes, so the only jurisdiction doesn't charge for seniors.
Ken's got his thumb up. I've got one of those free ones too, but that's okay.
So yes, even if you charge $5 to $10, it would be about $12,000 to $25,000. If you charge the 2019 rate for like what Biddeford charged, which is $15, you'd raise about almost $39,000 a year. And York's rate, it was $20. They had their seasonal pass at $40 a year, and the senior pass is $20, so it's about half. That would have raised about almost $52,000, which could help contribute to some of the upkeep in facilities and staff. But that's just a recommendation, something to look at. That's kind of the gist of where I'm at. I'm open to. I have about 1 week left in my internship. I'm happy to update, entertain any thoughts and ideas, and work with Jay, and kind of wrap this up. And if you have any questions, I'm trying to answer them.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Great job, Chris.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Matter of fact, if you want, send me an email with a contact, because I'd like to give feedback to your professor on a great job I thought you did here. And believe it or not, maybe a town council, they don't need to know me personally. That would be a detraction. Might look good on the resume. A great job. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. I thought that it was terrific to have this data in one place, and it's great background and context for what we're working on. So thank you.
Yeah, and I will add to that too, Chris. Did I hear you say you sell houses too?
I do. I'm also a real estate broker.
Cool. We can talk later.
Great.
'Cause I am.
Thought so.
All right. Anything further on this? I think this gives us some good basic data all in one place. It seems to hit on some of the issues that I saw in the long range planning meetings. That I'm sorry I wasn't able to attend those, but my excuse me, my assumption, and I know I should never assume, is the beach pass and the land trust has to do with some comments that came from folks about impact on natural resources. Is that correct, Chris? Or do you know, or Jay, or?
Yeah, I think, that's where, that was the direction that we asked Chris to take a look at, because that was something that was raised, certainly, I think, whether it was at an ordinance committee meeting or by another counselor, and it was also echoed at long range planning. So it was something we felt that maybe a point of interest as we move forward. So we might as well use Chris's good work to see what we can unearth.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. And Chris, don't go anywhere. Stay and watch what we're doing.
Right.
It's good for you to observe, and you can make comment too if you see something.
Thank you.
All right. Can we go now to Jay? Do you mind filling us in on the long range planning and what came out of there?
Sure, happy to. So I provided a memo, and really what I did was I took the same memo that we prepared, Karen and I prepared for the Long Range Planning Committee going into their July meeting, where we sort of laid out the 5 points of interest that were flagged by this committee to the Long Range Planning Committee, and where we tried to provide some background information for them to make a recommendation back to this committee.
Can we put, I'm sorry to interrupt, can we put that up somewhere for the public to see?
Jay, do you want to share your screen, or you want me to share the memo?
If you have it right there, go ahead. It'll take me just a minute to find it, but
Right.
Whichever, I'll race you. How's that?
All right.
Now it looks like you're gonna win, so. So I guess, let's see. So I guess what I should say, so Karen and I, based on the memo that Jean Marie the email that Jean Marie put together, which I think the other two counselors on the committee saw, sort of asked five areas of interest for recommendation from the ordinance, from the Long Range Planning Committee. And so that's how we tried to capture or put together a memo to help with their thoughts. I will say that the ordinance at the Long Range Planning Committee meeting, committee met twice on these issues and still didn't quite get all the way through the memo. So I think this is obviously sort of heady and hard stuff to get your mind wrapped around. And so I'm happy to sort of forge forward, see where we get, see what additional questions are raised as we go. And so without further delay, I'll sort of jump into really taking the questions really in the same order that they were provided for here in this memo. And I'm going to jump sort of by the purpose statement as really getting the Long Range Planning Committee up to speed as to what the ask of the Ordinance Committee was. But certainly if there's questions along the way, let's stop and do those. Because I really think it's helpful to take each one of these and have a discussion around them before we move to the next thing. But I'll obviously act at the discretion here of the committee. So the first question was about how are we doing, our growth? So just by way of background for, again, those who may be watching, I know back in, I believe it was the June Ordinance Committee meeting, we did an overview of what the Growth Management Ordinance is, how we've been tracking with growth. So really building off of that conversation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time sort of talking backwards on that, unless of course there's questions on that, or you wish that I do that. The first question was really about how are we doing in terms of our annual allocation? As folks will remember, we have 135 growth permits that are available annually. So come January 1 of each calendar year, automatically there's 135 growth permits that are available. The towns are required to, every so often, take a look at how at what those numbers look like, and potentially adjust the annual allocation. So state law essentially requires that a town allow for at least 105% or more, a minimum of 105% of the mean number of permits that are issued for new dwelling units within a 10-year period. So as you can see, what staff did, we went back and looked at the last 10 years, so 2010 to 19, and looked at the total number of permits issued. What we're really gonna focus on is the column to the far right. That's the total permits issued. And there's a slight difference between growth permits and total permits issued for the reason that we've talked about before, and that Ken Johnson had actually highlighted some months ago. The difference is the Hillcrest development, which has not been required to obtain growth permits for these 10 years. But where the state statute says for the number of development permits issued, talking with our town attorney, they said that that's both, even if there's permits that have been issued, building permits that have been issued that didn't require growth permit, you add those together. So that will be the difference between the growth permits and permits issued. We could talk about that a bit more, but hopefully that's somewhat of an explanation. So essentially over the last, the other thing I need to say is, so you do your average of your last 10 years and it's minus affordable housing. And we'll talk about affordable housing in another minute. So you take your average over the last 10 years minus any affordable housing permits that have been issued. And so for the town of Scarborough, it's 127 2/3 of a unit, given our fractional growth permit ability standards. When you do the 105%, it gets you to 134 growth permits is what we'd minimally be required to have available per state statute.
Ken has a question.
Hey, I hope you don't mind. I'd like to stay with us. And again, I'm just seeking understanding, not challenging it.
Yeah.
This chart definitely supports what you just said by the state mandate. But when the ordinance came, the GMO came into play back in 2001, the initial value was 135. So how was that derived when we didn't have this type of numbers? Do you remember? It's just a question.
So I wasn't in town back in 01. However, my understanding of it is there was a bit more of, how do I say, negotiation that went into it.
Okay.
That's my understanding. That was a good 10 years before maybe 5, 6, 8 years.
Rocky and Tom they've got both got their hands up on that.
I'm gonna bring Tom in.
Yeah.
Tom, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Rocky can give you the most direct experience. He was in the middle of it, and all I know is what I know from hearsay. But Jay's exactly right. We can probably research and put some finer detail to it, but the numbers were initially much lower, and I think the development community, and I think Rocky and many others that were actively in the development community were involved in that discussion, and there may even been threatened lawsuits, I don't recall, that motivated, but in the end, there was a negotiation that came up with that number.
Okay. I'll bring Mr. Rispera into the conversation. Tom, do you want to stay in it?
Sure, I'll keep quiet, but I'll stay available.
Fair enough. Mr. Rispera, you should be all set.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for taking my input. I was very much involved back when this all came into play. My recollection, and I could go back to my records, I have a file on it, had it in my hand the other day. My recollection is we could have supported, or the town should have been around 180 to 200 units. And if you actually used 105%, it would have been probably 2.25-ish. But we negotiated hard. 135 was as many as we could get at the time, and we accepted that. The development community accepted that at the time because originally it was a 3-year deal, and we felt that was we could live with it at the time.
Okay.
Fast forward, it's been 20 years and it's still here. But the short answer is 135 was negotiated.
Okay, thanks for
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, quite frankly, and again, I don't know if it really helps inform this discussion or not, if that 105% was part of state statute back in 2000, 2001, or.
I don't think it was.
Right. Oh, it was?
I don't think it was. I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't be jumping in. I'll mute myself.
But again, either way, that's certainly at this point pretty well in the past, and we know what the statute that we have to work with is now. But it is always helpful, as Ken, as you're pointing out, to understand how do we get where we are, right?
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. So I guess I would just, I think in quick summary, so planning board, long range planning committee looked at these numbers and said, well, if our current number is 134 and the last 10-year average, our current number is 135 and the last 10-year average is 134, seems like there's not a whole lot to do here. So they really have seem like the 135 number was fine. I should mention, I said a moment ago, I was going to circle back to it with the affordable housing bit. And I know there was some discussion last night about affordable housing in general in the town and more specific about a project. But I did mention that this number takes out affordable housing. What the state statute also requires is that a town must allow for a minimum or no less than 10% of the overall number of permits to be available for affordable housing. So if our numbers is 135, we would have to allow at least 14 units, if you're rounding up, to be available for affordable housing. The way the town of Scarborough approaches that issue is through our reserve pool. Our reserve pool always holds aside 20 permits for affordable housing. If you remember, we talked about, and actually it'll come up in just a minute here, but the reserve pool, the council can add to the reserve pool, and then the reserve pool slowly gets drawn down. So if you remember, harking back to June, in 2017, the council brought the number up to 500. We're down to around 180 left now. If that reserve pool ever gets drawn down to 0 and council takes no action to add to it, the ordinance has an automatic filler clause that on January 1, the reserve pool gets automatically 20 permits are put into the reserve pool reserved for affordable housing. And that takes no action of council, of anybody. It's written into the ordinance. So that's how the town of Scarborough addresses that issue. And 20, obviously being more than the 14 number, we're above the state minimum requirement. So.
Jay, can I ask a question that just popped into my head that I don't know the answer to, and maybe I should, but I don't. How do we what is affordable and how is that determined?
So we have our definition, which is 80% of the Portland median area income. And so that's the labor statistic area, Portland metropolitan statistical area. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I think I got my acronym
That's all right.
a little wrong there, but
that's okay. I knew what you meant.
I'm glad you understood where I was headed.
I think Tom has a comment.
Yeah, and if I could, it's further broken down by household size. So the actual area median income numbers grow as the household size grows. Right. So a household of one, roughly speaking, is, I shouldn't even quote it, but I can provide that to you if you're interested. but it goes on a graduated scale and increases as the household size increases. The other thing I'd mention, and it was at the front end of Chris's report, the general rule of thumb from affordability is if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing costs, it's not
Right.
affordable.
Right.
So that's the general backdrop. We're a bit more specific, and Jay's exactly right. We make it 80% of the local area median income on top of that.
And my other question, Tom, while we've got you, if you
Mhm.
happen, or Karen could pop in here too, is doesn't Scarborough have one of the highest median incomes in this Portland municipal statistical area?
Well, that's a blended rate. So
I know it is, but
um,
if you broke them out,
Scarborough is usually about fifth in
Oh,
the
okay.
hierarchy. We're
Okay.
behind Falmouth, Cape Elizabeth,
okay.
Yarmouth, and
Cumberland.
weirdly North
Cumberland.
Yarmouth.
Cumberland, I know, is the highest. Yeah, okay.
We're
All
usually
right.
about fifth, and we're usually fifth actually on all of the indicators, whether you use median family,
Okay,
household, or per capita.
okay.
But
Thank you.
purposely, that AMI, that statistic is a blended rate for the metropolitan area.
Yep. Thank you. All right, Jay.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
So again, I guess I'll just close out annual permits by saying the Long Range Planning Committee, sort of saying stand pat seems to be what the numbers indicate. So that's where they came in with that one. The next question had to do with asking the Long Range Planning Committee to really sort of look back at the 2017 decision of council to update the reserve pool, and sort of just understand what happened there, maybe give some thoughts around that. And so I know I gave you an update back in June about why, what was going on in 2017 when the pool got increased from 215 units to 500. So unless you feel necessary, I wasn't going to sort of dive back into the history on that, other than to say that the Long Range Planning Committee, we did pull out sort of the documents that were provided to council as part of that consideration, part of the documents that were part of the Long Range Planning Committee's consideration and initial recommendation to council at the time. And, they basically felt, well, based on the information provided at the time, that the decision was made, based on sound information. And that, there's also a recognition that looking at the ordinance, really at this point, there's not a whole lot, the way the ordinance is written, that could be done about the 2017 decision. And for the simple reason that the way the ordinance is written is that it gives council the sole authority to add to the reserve pool, which in 2017, based on the information and discussions at the time, the council had the will to do. And the only way to draw down the reserve pool is by actually allocating the permits. So it's not as though there can be, the way the ordinance is written today, there isn't a body that could sort of say, well, we're going to just reduce the reserve pool by a certain amount based on new information. So sort of based on that, the committee said, okay, it seems like the 2017 decision, based on the best information available at the time, was, they didn't have much to say about that. However, what they are suggesting is that prior to any future discussions around the reserve pool, that we really take a strong look at some of these data sets and analysis that Chris has started, and some other data points really be part of that conversation. Right now, we have about, I'm trying to remember what the number is. It's somewhere in the order of 180 or 150 permits left in the reserve pool. And so, I don't think the Long Range Committee felt that there was an immediate need to do anything, but that the information that we gather as part of this process might help inform any future discussions. And really, I think when we get to the next item, when we start talking about fractional units, that's where we sort of listed out what a number of those data sets are. So maybe what I'll do is just wait till we get to that next one, and then we can talk about that a little bit more.
Could I just offer a little further context in and around that 2017 decision?
Sure, go ahead.
Just very, very quickly, you may recall there was a study done in the greater Portland area that identified something in the order of a 4,000 unit deficit of multifamily units. And every developer in the area took note of that. And there was a tremendous interest in trying to meet that demand where it was. And so there was a real gold rush, if you will. There were a number of projects kind of in planning phases, but one in particular came forward, and that was the Gateway project up on Higas Parkway. And that required a contract zone amendment to allow the density that they were seeking. And as part of that approval, they asked for and did receive an assurance that they would have their growth permits. A footnote to the multifamily development, unlike any other, certainly unlike single family, the speed with which they build these units and the fact that they build them in 10 and 12 units under one roof really changes the complexion of how to pace, how normally permits would be paced in the practical course of construction. And case in point, Gateway, in a 24-month period, they've built and have occupied 288 units, whereas single family, that would take you 2 decades to build out.
Yeah.
So that's a real game changer. The final piece I would just add, and I need to verify this through research, but I was told that early on, when permits went unused, when we didn't use all the 135, the extra ones went into the reserve pool and kind of built up in that reserve pool. That practice had been stopped. And I recall Dan Bacon in the course of this discussion doing the math. Basically, had that practice been allowed, it was close to that 500 number. So it was another way to kind of calibrate and arrive at that number. So it's a combination of a tangible project that the town desired, which was Gateway, and the realization that had we just simply allowed unused permits to funnel into the reserve pool, we would have been in that range of 500. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, but that's my recollection.
So
Thank you. Ken has had his hand up.
Yeah, hey, thanks. Right, I mean, that's growth management through market demands, but that's a different topic. While I'll get you right here, Tom, I just want a couple points of clarity. Again, I only seek understanding, but this is live, and Liam, I'm assuming you're recording this, because there's been a couple statements made that I just need to clarify from my understanding. Jay just gave, a very good description on the GMO and the town council authority of being able to add to it, to the reserve pool. And the only way to draw that down is to actually use the permits within the reserve pool. I just need, again, and it sounds logical. I just want to make sure that I understand the overriding item there is the authority of the town council. Is that correct? I mean, the town council could change that ordinance and remove whatever is in that reserve pool, just as a hypothetical. Because again, I'm struggling, and I heard Jean Marie at the introduction, is that the long range planning committee controls the growth in the town of Scarborough. So it's just not reconciling to me. So I was going to just ask Tom for clarity. Who does control the growth in the town of Scarborough?
Well, right now, your growth management ordinance as written is what controls it, but that's totally within the control of council. You can change it. A long range planning committee doesn't have any role to play other than advisory.
Thank you. Okay, and it was just clarity. It was nothing to hint at intent. I've heard it, and again, certain times it's important to clarify some terminology. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and Ken, I think the reserve pool is there, and the council is able to replenish it at its will to really add a level of flexibility. When there's a project that you want for whatever reason, you have fairly ready ability to make that happen, as opposed to needing to modify the ordinance.
Correct. Great. Thank you.
And I know Don has his hands up, but if I could just flush that out just a little further, talk about who has the ability to put their hands on the ordinance, if you will. The one piece that we had talked about previously, I just want to mention is Tom just said, the Long Range Planning Committee is an advisory group to the council. Ultimately, it's council's decision on what it is in the ordinance. But I will say that drawing down of the reserve pool, I just want to remind folks that the reserve pool is set by council. And then in the ordinance, it says that the planning board, through their review process, has certain criteria. Projects need to meet a certain criteria. And then if a project meets one of 4 criteria, the planning board can still has the ability to allow that project to pull from the reserve pool if they find it meets a host of other sort of provisions that are written into the ordinance. So I do just want to mention that the planning board does have some play here in terms of how the allocation of those permits, right?
And
that's what I was getting at.
And Jay, just a clarification for Ken as well. I think when you said that the council doesn't have the power to remove units, that's under the existing ordinance. In other words, under the rules of the existing ordinance, they're not removed. You would have to amend the ordinance to do that. So that's just a fine line, the clarification of why we said it that way.
And again, not suggesting that, I was just trying to get clarity on that. Thank you.
Right.
Dawn, are you off video? Because you're not showing up on my screen.
Hang on a minute. No, sorry. I'm here. I just shut it off.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Unfortunately, I had a couple questions. I think this discussion is a good illustration of what's been happening, in the whole process of us, delving into the detail here of the growth management ordinance. It's very complex. There are a lot of moving pieces. We've made some changes along the way. We're not totally clear on what the effect has been on all of them. I think some of the changes, to increase the reserve pool and to, add permits like we did in 2017. And we haven't talked about fractionalization yet, but those actions that were taken, you have had outcomes, and it's not exactly clear, what the effect has been. One thing it is clear in my mind that this whole thing is cyclical. Development is cyclical. It follows big swings in the business cycle for both residential and commercial building. And it's also, when we've made changes, they've really been demand driven. Okay. They've really been developer driven, where, there's been a fear that there would not be enough permitting to allow the construction of developments that builders wanted to, and builders and buyers wanted to support. So this is a very complicated issue. I know we are still making our way towards some findings and to try to understand what the levers are that we had, but I think it's from our standpoint, and I'll speak for myself, not necessarily also for the council or for Jean Marie or Ken, but there's been a public reaction to the pace of development over the past several years. I think a lot of it is, it's been driven by the downs. I think a lot of it has been driven by the impact that people see in the way of traffic and impact on schools, et cetera. So, it's that's kind of why we're talking about it now. And I think it is great that we're being very careful and steady in our approach and making sure we're studying it carefully before we just, jump ahead to make recommendations that may have unintended consequences. So, I think we're in a good place, but I think it's still not completely clear that, what the potential solutions might be.
Right.
So-
and I just want to emphasize, and I know I've had this discussion with both Counselor Johnson and Counselor Hamel, that I definitely, this is a process, and we are not gonna, in case anyone in the public thinks we're gonna come out of this meeting today with, oh yeah, we're gonna do X, Y, and Z. That's not what's happening. This is definitely fact finding and getting more information and some of the background. And long range planning's got another meeting September 11th that deals with the questions, excuse me, that they were given. So I just want to make it very clear to the public that we're not going to have a report out for a couple months anyway, I would say. So, all right, thanks, Dawn.
Katerina, there
Yeah.
was an attendee who had his hand up. I'm not sure if Mr. Aspera wants to chime
Oh,
in.
yeah.
or
I'm
not.
sorry. I can't.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
Rocky, do you want to put your hand up? Oh, Rocky's, you're back on.
I'm back on. I appreciate you including me. I just wanted to confirm something that Tom had said earlier about the in the original growth management ordinance. One of the key things that the developers had fought for and got was the fact that any unused permits would roll over, and that was super important to us because we recognized that the economy would ebb and flow, and there would be years where permits were not used. And if the town truly simply wanted to average the growth, to manage it and have it average, there would be no reason why, if permits weren't used, that they would roll over to another year. And so that went that way for quite some time. And then it got changed, I think, in either 06 or 08. I don't remember when they went to the fractional system. But I just wanted to confirm that was very important at the time, and I still think it's important. Because we're gonna come into times where probably the permits don't all get used, and they ought to roll over. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Shimmer, could I just add one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Don talked about market, on all different factors, engaging why sometimes we've looked at the permitting, and I just want to add demographics to that
Yeah.
list as well, because some things, the market responds to changing demographics, and so just looking at demographics as a root cause of why we are looking at alternative types of units as well. Just want to add that to the list.
Yep. And also, I would remind folks, both here and in the audience, whenever people are watching this, that this is why we have an overarching comprehensive plan. This is why you do that, because we do have parts. I happen to live in the rural part of town where you aren't going to put these huge developments and whatever because of the way the ordinances are written and the comprehensive plan is. But we do have and have identified in town so-called high growth areas where it makes sense to do infill or development. And I know, in my own business in real estate, I mean, we've seen housing prices just skyrocket because of lack of inventory. So when you have very restrictive zoning or restrictive non-inclusionary building permitting processes or whatever you want to call it, you're just exacerbating that problem. And driving people out of your towns and or out of your state. But anyway, that's my soapbox for today on that. So, but this is why we're meeting, so we can come up with what makes sense. Where were we, Jay?
I think we had addressed the reserve pool, and I think if we jump into the fractional units, that's where we'll start to really dive into the data, what additional data sets do we need to help inform the discussion over the next couple of months, as you just said, and sort of, I think what Don was talking a little bit about as well, really trying to understand, we've seen some development occur, and we have people living under roofs now, so we can really start to take account of what's happening. I think last night was a good example. Was that just last night? I think it was when as part of the town's presentation of the CEA, we're able to identify that we anticipated, I think it was, remind me, Karen, 23 students would be coming out of the Downs But currently there's only 15 enrolled. Now that could change between now and the start of school, but I think we can start to look at developments that have occurred. The Beacon is pretty well occupied, and South Village and Eastern Village. So we can really start to put some numbers together. So speaking of which, that's really where fractional units, this issue around fractional units is really where I would say the Long Range Planning Committee spent a good portion of their time. Don, I know you were at both of those meetings, and I think hopefully you agree that this really seems to be the one where there's a lot of conversation around, and really at this point it's about trying to understand, are the assumptions we made, back in 2006, 7, and 8, when we went to the fractional units and fractional growth permits, still valid? Can we start to verify those? And what are sort of the best, what are the national trends showing? And that's really, again, where Chris's work will start to help inform that discussion. So with respect to how to treat fractional units going forward, this is one where the Long Range Planning Committee is simply, as I heard it, saying, we need more information, we need more time, we need more data. And so I've started to spell out those type of things that we think might help in that discussion, and certainly would love to hear what other elements the Ordinance Committee members or other counselors, as you're having conversations in the next few weeks, think would help inform the discussion. Excuse me. So, really we're starting to look at, is there a correlation between the number of cars and bedrooms in a unit? The anticipated trips generated by unit size or type. I think the question is it really and maybe I should just pause for just a quick moment, because I know there are some folks who don't have all the history. When I talk about fractional units in town, we allow our density and our growth permits. We have what we call fractional unit sizes. So a unit that is 1 bedroom or less and 750 square feet or less, and it needs to meet both those criteria, counts as a half a unit. And a unit that has 2 bedrooms or less and is 1,200 square feet or less counts as 2/3 of a unit. I think some of the conversation we have with Long Range Planning Committee is it bedrooms? Is that really sort of a good indicator of impacts, or is it unit size? Is it 2 bedrooms and 1,000 feet actually should be 2/3? Is it 2 bedrooms and 2,000 feet? I don't know what that is, but starting to think about, do those two things have to go together? Or can you, so that's where, when I talk about really understanding, as I just said, anticipated trips by both unit size and unit type, that's really sort of what that type of information might inform. Student population by unit size and type, impacts on public safety and demands for public services, sanitary demands we've talked about, demands on access to the natural resources, and again, really sort of looking at national sources, what's happening in the national trends, but also really looking locally where we have we have a number of built occupied units in town, both newer and some that are older, built in the 80s, that we could take a look at and sort of see and judge and try to, not judge, but analyze, I should say, what those different impacts are. So I really think that's where the committee, again, as I said, spent a lot of time sort of talking about this issue. No clear recommendation at this point in any way, really about what more information should we be gathering. And that's what I know Karen and I intend to start, continue, I should say, with Chris's work, continue to do and pull together to inform this ongoing discussion.
Yeah, I know from what I've heard from other counselors and from school board too, and some meetings, is this whole, it seems to be the lightning rod piece seems to be the 2-bedroom units, is how are those really impacting schools in that case, more so than the road trips or trips, whatever you call from a house or a number of cars. It seems to be the impact of schools. And would that you say that's right, Ken and Dawn? I mean, that's seems to be the one place. Is that 2-bedroom cutoff?
Yeah, I think that's, seems to be the, a question mark. I think the fractionalization, is also confusing because we talk about units, then we talk about permits, and we talk about, square footage and, so, in a half a unit, what do you do with the rounding on half units and 0.667 units? I mean, what, does it round up or round down? So, I mean, I think that just the terminology is a little confusing. We talk, about dwelling units. We talk about permits. We talk about growth permits. It is kind of confusing to know.
Ken, you go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, just a comment. I think the long range planning did a great job. I watched both the meetings. Pretty impressive, very smart folks, and I saw how they struggled with the fractionalization, which kind of says something, by itself. But I don't know about you, but after a long day's work, I don't go to my unit. I go home. So anyway, carry on.
All right, Jay. Anything else?
I don't have anything else at this point. As I said, I think, my memo, our memo, we laid out what some data points that we're going to continue to explore. So we're happy to sort of continue that conversation here, or maybe you need, have some more time to think about it and send emails along. I think Karen and I will be working, I said, over the next course of several, weeks and months to try to pull stuff together. So
what's the focus of the September 11th meeting? I should know that. But I haven't read that yet.
In fairness, Jean Marie, we haven't sent the agenda out yet.
Oh, okay,
fairness,
good.
That's not actually, we're going to pivot away from growth management for right now. Because we have a couple other things that are need some consideration. There's some, I would say we're going to pivot away from growth management for the short term. But I think the long range planning committee stands ready to continue the conversation.
Okay, great.
There was mention, I should say, we're talking a little bit about next steps. I know there's a couple, but one of the things the long range planning committee did talk about is potentially, at some point, conducting a workshop either with this council, with this committee, or the entire council, but also engaging obviously the stakeholders. We see Rocky Risbera has been part of this conversation, but there's clearly others, both in the development community and citizens at large, whatever business they're in, who probably want to be part of this conversation. So there had been some, the long range planning committee didn't come up with sort of a game plan moving forward yet, but just sort of said, hey, let's, I think, as I've already heard here with you folks, we understand that this is going to be an ongoing discussion, and that, there's no immediate, sounds like what I'm hearing anyways, there's probably not going to be any immediate changes, but.
Mr. Hamill.
Yeah, so I'd just like to, thank Jay, for his work and the work of the Long Range Planning Committee. They've been very deliberate and very thoughtful, and I think the emphasis that Jay and team have put on being fact-based. I know I've heard Rocky, underline this as well. The need for us to verify what the numbers are and compare those to the assumptions, or at least even our projections. And then decide what we need to do rather than jumping ahead, or assuming we know what the data is. Because we've seen already we were wrong on our assumptions on enrollment so far. The last bit of data shows they are trending. Enrollment figures are trending lower than anticipated. I think there are other things that are going to be happening that may, have a different impact on the numbers. So I think that, I would just, applaud and reinforce the need to be deliberate and steady and careful, as we move forward on our analysis. I know public wants something done yesterday, but I think it's going to be important we take the time to decide what, the real controlling factors are, and then focus on those.
Okay. Ken?
Yeah, I want to thank you too, Jay. I know you've done a lot of hard work. You, Karen, LRPC, everybody, really definitely appreciate it. But back to the stakeholders, just to get some input from you. I do believe this committee does plan on engaging with the developers.
Yep.
I don't know what in form yet. I think we're going to have that discussion after this session right here. For who we would classify as a developer, of course, Mr. Risbera and
Right.
and Mr. Mishu, and they actually, I think, last night definitely hinted that they were interested in the discussion. I was thinking also maybe Carrie Anderson, another master planner, developer, maybe Elliot Chandler.
Elliot, yep.
Who are the other, for lack of a better term, players, developers, not the one-offs? I did know about the gentleman down here on the Cottage Road. I think I had sent you an email.
Mhm.
Maybe I could have a discussion with him, but I was going to get some advice from you first. Is he a one-off with just a big project, or do you think he'll be around for a while? Plus, his project will be going for a while, correct? That's probably a 2 or 3 year project.
So, yeah, I think Mr. O'Leary certainly has
O'Leary.
another profession, and he's owned this one property for quite a while and has really targeted this one. So I think that's a fair characterization of what my expectation would be going forward, is that he'll be fairly focused on that one project.
Okay.
I could, future is always uncertain, but that
Right.
seems like a fair characterization. But certainly staff could put together a list of folks, and again, of course, we'll do the appropriate notifications, and maybe even as we understand our timing, do a Facebook post, or
Yeah.
really try to advertise, because I think we do, like always, want to try to cast as wide a net as we can. But certainly, I think this type of conversation has the greatest impacts on those that, as you were just representing, are those developers that are
Okay.
in the large projects that are doing multiple things, where, if I'm just building a single family home, for the most part, I'm gonna be able to get my growth permit and,
Right.
and be happy, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
So where do we go from here?
So there were
Um,
actually two other things that
Oh, okay,
planning
sorry.
committee weighed in on. So if we're good with fractional units for now.
Yeah, sorry.
Jay,
Nope, that's
Jay,
quite
can
a
I
bit.
just stop you for a sec? Tom has his hand up. I think he wants to contribute something.
I just want to make one comment kind of as you wrap up the fractionalization. There's a lot of mystery around this as to why it came to be in the first place. In fact, I think some might even kind of demonize it, that it's kind of a scheme. Keep in mind that your touch point is always your comprehensive plan. That articulates these
Yeah.
broad themes, these aspirational goals. And the manifestation of that is through your land use, through your zoning, in this case, growth management, certainly. And in particular, the growth management ordinance, these most recent changes in that 06 to 08 range, we're really advancing some of the key priorities identified very clearly in the 06 comp plan, those being encouraging diversity, housing diversity, and increasing density. These were very particular strategies to advance those very direct themes from the comp plan. So they didn't come out of the ether. They were very deliberate as a way to actually implement what the comp plan said it wanted.
Right. I have one final question on that, because it appears, I think we've heard this from a couple folks with their input, that the town of Scarborough is the only known municipality that utilizes fractionalization, correct? That's my understanding, and I think Chris actually echoed that. General question, was this bounced through any legal procedures because it is mandated by the certain requirements by state mandates? Was this vetted through the legal outside of our own legal entity? I mean, did somebody engage the state, maybe MMA, just to see, is fractionalization within the boundaries of the mandate of the state for growth management? Just a general question, yes or no would do it?
I'm certain we consulted with the town attorney. I do not recall, going beyond that.
Okay, thank you.
And just a point of fact, though it appears as though we may be the only Maine community, I think it is a a fairly common practice elsewhere in the country. So it's not, I just wanted to put it in context.
Yeah, thank you.
So I guess what I'll do is now, the other question, there were really two more questions that the ordinance committee asked long rangers to weigh in on. And one of those, the next one was really about the allocation of permits by project. And, it seemed to be the question of, one development sort of being able to phase out, if you will, and being able to, again, I'll step back for just a quick moment. Through our annual allocation, there's a provision that says any project is only eligible for upwards of 20% of the annual allocation. That would be 27 growth permits. And so there was some question about some of the larger projects we have in town, such as Dunstan, Eastern, and the Downs. Will have multiple subdivisions because they're projects of such a different scale that they'll have multiple subdivisions. And therefore, I think, I'll just use the Downs. Rocky's here to correct me where I go wrong. There was some 135 units plus or minus built within the last year and a half, or as we all saw, go up pretty quickly. And those, but there were different subdivisions. So the single family component was one subdivision. The first batch of multifamily and duplexes that you see on the right-hand side coming off Route 1 was another subdivision. The next batch of multifamily, which are rentals, was another subdivision. So they're able to sort of parse that out and then be able to secure the upwards of 20% for each subdivision. The Long Range Planning Committee sort of talked about this issue and really sort of thought about it in terms of a common scheme, right? We call the Downs a common scheme, or Eastern Village a common scheme of development. Is that an issue? Really the conversation centered around, well, boy, it seems technically feasible that one subdivision could potentially have 5 different one common scheme, let me say, could have 5 separate subdivisions in there and come in for 20% on all 5 of those and secure all the permits. I think the Long Range Planning Committee talked a bit about that, and based on the history we have, almost 20-year history of the growth management ordinance, never really seen anything come close to looking like that. The committee felt, while technically a possibility, it seems very unlikely. So I think their recommendation, I'm just sort of looking at this. So after discussion, the consensus was the committee didn't have any issues with the town's current provisions on this point. So I think that was sort of where they wound up after some discussion.
And Jay and maybe Rocky can weigh in on this too. My assumption, and again, I'm using that word, you gotta be careful, is that when you pull a permit, you've got, 6 months to complete it? And then you get
into a building permit.
Oh, into a building permit, okay.
Correct. And then you have a year to get I think it's either a year or 6 months to get started on the building permit.
Yeah, I think it's the shorter of the two.
I think it is too, yeah.
But my point being that if I'm a developer and I'm doing particularly single family, you don't build 50 of them all at once because of the cost factor. And am I right, Rocky? I mean, and that would kind of help. It's sort of self-regulating.
And before Rocky, I think in terms of the single family, certainly, I think we have a very good example happening in town right now. Because I think the projects we just talked about, Eastern, Dunstan, Downs, are a mix of uses. I think Layton Farm is a really good example. That's the subdivision that's off Elmwood. Has 99 lots in it. It was approved back in, gosh, if I had to guess, I'm going to say 2014, 2015, and they're, probably 2/3 of the way built out. So I think for single family development, you're that seems to be the pace that we see.
Yeah. Can we go to Rocky first? Ken, do you mind? And then we'll go to Ken. Remind me, Ken. Go ahead, Rocky.
Okay, yeah, I'm not on mute. I just wanted to say that Jay gave a pretty good explanation there, but one thing that I think got left out that you have to think about, especially in the Downs instance, often the development entity, the person who, the development company that's actually building those projects are different.
Yeah.
It's not always Crossroads Holdings that's
Right.
doing everything at the Downs, and I think that actually happens maybe a lot more than people
Yeah.
might realize. But if you think about the Downs, there are many different developers in there actually doing the project.
That's a good point. I'd forgotten that. Thank you.
And do keep in mind, as Jay mentioned earlier, there's also the ability for certain projects, affordable housing, for instance, and also those approved through a contract zone like Gateway that are allowed to dip into the pool. Those aren't counted in that calculation. They have a kind of an automatic pass, if you will, to be able to get growth permits in a separate process.
Well, this topic sounds like it's something that definitely, if we doing a roundtable or workshop with some developers, we could get some more input too. Ken, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I could talk about this one all day long, but I'm not gonna, because I did watch the long range in this topic, and I really think something got lost there. I don't think anybody was ever concerned that one developer would suck up all the permits. Got to remember, this ordinance came into play long before the master plan concept, which I still want to understand how this master plan came in, where you could have multiple subdivisions. You have to look at it, this is the way I look at it, is the 20% was just another way to manage growth, okay? The pace of growth. That's what the intent was, and it was a fair sharing across developers. I don't think anywhere anybody's ever thought that a single developer would be consuming all the permits. However, it does have some impacts. Now, we've not had this with Risbera and the Downs, but I've had to do a site walk with another remain nameless master plan development that doesn't have the resources that a Risbera has, that was jumping from subdivision to subdivision before finishing subdivision A, moving assets over to subdivision B, and all of a sudden we had performance problems. So again, it's all wrapped in, it's a bigger picture than, again, I sense lots of folks think that we should be managing our growth by market demand, and that's not what the intent of that ordinance was, and that's not what I generally feel. But anyway, thanks again for allowing me to give input.
Dawn.
Thank you. I wanted to build on something that Ken just mentioned, that this subdivision, individual division question. So it goes deeper than just the matter of, who's pulling permits. Because even though, we heard Rocky say that there are many developers in the Downs, yes, that's true, but there are still, other financial relationships, between and among developers, and somebody might be selling the land and holding a percentage of an entity that's developing, something within the master plan. So it's not just a matter of permit allocation. It's also a matter of, what financial interests are involved, there. So, I mean, that's not necessarily something the town can control or try to manage, but I think it's just something to help us understand, what's really driving the development and, where interests, may be aligned in terms of the demand side of the equation.
Mhm.
I mean, I just used an example from the update last night. This is the first year's review of the Downs. 138 units are completed to date, with another almost 550 on the horizon in the next, in the next 5 years, I guess it is, or the next 3 years. And 80% of those are slated to be senior assisted living, multifamily and condos. So I mean, there's big implications to just that one development and that activity within that one place. So I just something for us to keep in mind as well, in terms of, when we're trying to evaluate what the impact is, and, whose interests are involved and what's driving the ultimate outcome here on any revisions.
And I see just the discussion we're having right now it speaks to our need to really analyze what we've got, talk to the different stakeholders, make sure we are hearing from people who are concerned and what their concerns are, because there's that balance there. And I know I've heard this, well, we can't just have it market driven. But that's one element of it. And you got to have that balance between the right to develop, private property rights, as well as, what are the needs of the community, which brings me back to where are we with this comprehensive plan, Jay? I'm putting you right on the spot with that one. I know, because that I see that as we need that, because that's kind of the overarching, either the overarching or the underpinning, however you want to put it for this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's certainly something that, I think Karen and I and Tom have talked about, would really like to get back sort of in the eye, if you will. Yeah. If you'll recall, back on, it was March 6th, the Long Range Planning Committee moved the current draft out of committee and said they were satisfied with it, and we're coming up with a plan of where to go next. We're going to try to get together with council to say, okay, here's the draft. We want to start to do some public discussion. And then I think it was March 13th, COVID really broke loose, and we all went home for 2 months. Right. And now we're crawling out from under our COVID rock, and we're trying to figure it out. So to your point, I was hoping that a conversation around the comp plan would be on the September 11th Long Rangers ordinance to try to get that going. And I understand from a conversation I had with Tom earlier today that actually, Ken, you were thinking about maybe doing and using your article. Maybe that's what I just see your hand was up. Just sorry if I jumped you there.
No, that's all right. I'm glad you mentioned it, because the next leader article in the Scarborough Leader is going to be about the comprehensive plan. That's why I reached out to you to get. I'd like to have a discussion with the chair of the LRPC, because I want to do a few things and I want to actually engage him with it. I want to spark the interest of the public, start thinking about it, maybe where to go to start reading it and position it quite well. And then I think the council has got to, we got to start addressing it. So we've just been a little busy because of COVID, but it's definitely an important thing that we all want to get involved. So,
Jean Marie, I think what we're all saying is we're ready when you guys are ready.
Yeah, I mean, and we have the vice chair of the council sitting here, Mr. Hamill.
Yes.
Just something to put on that agenda, maybe to look at. We do need to get this comprehensive plan out there, particularly where we're talking about growth management, because they go hand in hand. So.
And Don, before you start, because she's pressing you for an answer, just give it a thought, because I think a workshop just to familiarize the council with it, and to actually, because I'm very interested in seeing the delta from the 06 to the 220. So things like that, to just get the energy going in the conversation, get everybody grounded and whatnot.
Yeah, there's no question that we need to bring that back, onto the screen for people, and we'll get it in the queue. And it does drive. It's it's an umbrella document that covers a lot of things. So the one thing, a couple caveats though, it is a very broad document. Even the original one was at a principal level, is very broad. And there's a lot of room for interpretation. It does give a lot of latitude to how to reconcile things with the plan, number one. Number two, the update was, the original plan was very comprehensive. It had a lot of standing committees, went on for months. The revision to the plan was, a smaller, effort. So we want to make sure we're not losing anything from the original plan, in our update of the new one. So anyway, those are just a couple of issues.
Yeah. I just don't want us to lose the thread of that, just because I don't want to get, as you like to say, Dawn, get ahead of our skis, or the tips of our skis, whatever it is that saying.
Yeah, it's seasonally inappropriate, but yeah,
I know.
Right.
But,
Water skis.
Okay, water skis.
Okay, right. Jay, is anything else?
The last item was the discussion around moratorium, and actually, I think that was maybe Jean Marie, you even mentioned that earlier. So based on what the Long Range Planning Committee has seen, what the state statute language is around, the sort of two provisions for why you might enact a moratorium, the Long Range Planning Committee didn't feel that that was perhaps a necessary tool at this time.
Right.
I'll just keep it that brief since I know we're
And
getting.
that's fine. That word just came up with some other counselors, so that's why we included it in our discussion with long range planning.
I would just mention that number one there is something to keep in mind in terms of what the goal of the growth management ordinance might be. So the first and I presume primary reason to enact a moratorium is to prevent a shortage or overburden of public facilities.
Yeah.
To me, that's understanding impact, and that has a negative connotation. And so I think that's a key thing. And I was very pleased to hear that we've got some good thoughts underway to surround ourselves with data so we can understand impacts. And I think that's a real key ingredient or component of the growth management ordinance in my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. All right, where do we go from here, guys? Now I'm going to focus on my fellow members, Mr. Hamill and Mr. Johnson. What's your thinking?
Just next steps, engage
Yep.
maybe the next set of stakeholders, possibly the developers. I'm not sure. We could
Okay.
brainstorm. I don't know if we need to decide right now but still, I think our information gathering venture is not over.
No,
Right.
not by a long shot. Dawn?
Yeah, I agree with Ken on his comment. I'll add a couple of things. We touched on comprehensive plan, so let's make sure we try to get that at least in some general timing and sequence for the next several months. Number one. Number two, I would say that we do have a couple of pieces of work we're waiting for the long rangers to come back to us on. So I'd like us to, to make time for that, recognizing they do have other fish to fry, not just answering our memo there of a month or two ago. So,
Right.
Jay, do you have give us an idea on this? Maybe it's not a September timing, it's an October timing.
Right.
Because what I think Jean Marie's asking is when can we get those missing pieces of data so we can come around as a committee with recommendations for the council, in a workshop or something more definitive, if that's possible.
Yeah, I would think we should be able to provide some more information for this committee and long rangers come October. I know my understanding, talking with Jean Marie, that we still have, this committee has 5G on its radar.
Yeah.
I think that maybe
That's September.
I
Yeah.
think that might be next up, and I know I need to now pivot my attention to that because I remember what the heck I was doing with that a month ago. So, so yeah, I would think we're probably we're a month and a half away from having continuing this conversation or so.
Yep. But Jean Marie, what we might consider is preliminary recommendations, or here's what we know now, and here's what's missing, and then we provide a timing, on that. So we're resetting expectations. We made a lot of headway. We learned some new things. We're validating data to verify perceptions, separate perceptions from reality, and we'll combine them, and then we'll be ready. So.
Because our next ordinance meeting would be October 22nd, if on the regularly scheduled. I was just looking at my calendar.
You don't mean September?
Excuse me?
You said October? Do you mean?
Oh, I'm sorry, October 22nd. September is 5G, and that's where that date is. I'm sorry.
I guess that's what
it's been a long day. It was a long night last night too.
Yeah, I guess just as part of this conversation, I do want to be, I guess I don't want to overcommit, because I do think it is important for us to really talk about how are we going to integrate the comp plan with this discussion. So it may, I guess that we need to have an ongoing discussion, maybe, I don't know if now is necessarily the time, but with the, council chair, Tom, vice chair,
that's fine.
figure out really what are the priorities, because we do have, as Don said, the comprehensive plan it's all encompassing. I mean, we think
Right.
growth management is difficult. That's just talking about the pace of development. You
Right.
know, the comp plan talks about not just development, it talks about everything in the community. So I think, yeah, I just want to be, you know,
Well, and the reason I throw out October 22nd is not so much to say we're definitely, you know, we may have a bullet on this, but to at least reserve some time for October or have that as a goal date for having some of this in. Does that make sense to Dawn and Ken?
Yeah, in the least preliminary recommendations.
Yeah,
Over.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the distinction with, sorry, go ahead, Ken.
No, like a status report, at least we're,
yeah,
Status.
we're moving forward. That's
right.
Yeah, 5G is, not to get in the weeds here, but 5G, we're going to be coming back, I think, in September with proposed ordinance language,
Yeah.
for us to, to
Right.
finalize. So that is farther along,
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it's less complex of an issue.
No,
You So, but it is farther along.
no. Well, and that's a whole different ball of wax. I mean, this is a
Yeah.
huge ball of wax when you're
Yeah.
talking about growth of a town the size of Scarborough. So,
Yep.
all right. So let's do this. I will come up with some sort of a report back to the council on what we're doing, if that's okay, and I'll run it by you two, Ken and Dawn.
Great.
So that you can look at it and add or subtract from whatever I write. I'll get
Great.
that done in the next week. See, I
Good.
have to set homework for myself or it doesn't get done. It goes from my 20%, the Pareto principle, 20% and then 80%. It doesn't make my 20% if I don't put it there. We will tentatively shoot for at least some type of discussion on the 22nd of October, follow up. In the meantime, Dawn's going to talk to the what's his name? Your Mr. Hamill, the other Mr. Johnson, Chair Johnson, about something with comp plan, workshop, something
Yep.
with the council. in
An
the near
ETA,
future.
yeah, estimated time of arrival. or
Yeah. And we will start weaving this stuff together. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yes.
All right. Anything else? I hope not, because I'll kill anybody. No.
Oh, thank everybody. Thank you.
No, thank you all. This is awesome work. I know that everyone has a lot on their plate. Chris, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed your time in Scarborough.
Send me that email, Chris.
I know,
Send me
really,
that contact.
I will do
Really?
that. Yes,
really.
absolutely.
That's great. Tom or Rocky, anything? Are we good? You can just nod. I can't see you.
You look good.
Okay. Tom? No. Okay. Can I have a motion for, Ken, you waving?
No, I was waving about to log off. I'm sorry.
We have to
Yeah,
adjourn.
we
We have to adjourn officially. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
I second
In
it.
second, okay. We have to take a formal vote on that, Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Hamill,
Yes.
Ms. Katerina says yes. And we're all done, 5:44 PM. That was great. Good meeting.